WUSA 9 News at 5 begins with some breaking news in the Brendan-Banfield murder trial. In the last 30 minutes, we learned that the jury has reached a verdict on Banfield's fate.
Yeah, so as you know, Banfield is accused of conspiring with his family au pair to kill his wife and another man. Thank you for being here with us tonight at 5 o'clock. I'm Lorenzo Hall.
I'm Leslie Foster. We've got Katie Lesso, who has been following this case from the very beginning, doing that live everyday streaming coverage from gavel to gavel on WUSA 9 Plus and YouTube. Needless to say, this has captured not just this community's attention, but really the nation's attention, because of some of these rather salacious details here. So why don't we talk about some of the things that the jurors had to consider as they are coming up with this verdict, which we anticipate we should be learning any moment now.
Yeah, literally any moment. And following that, we will hear from the prosecutor, the Commonwealth Attorney, Steve Descano. So we are expecting to hear from him after that. But yeah, the jury had to consider the 4 charges that are at stake here. So it's aggravated murder, 2 counts of aggravated murder, a child endangerment charge, and use of a firearm in the commission of a murder. And with the aggravated murder charges, they had to consider both the fact that Brendan Banfield would either be guilty of killing both Christine and Joseph Ryan, or neither of them.
So this is an all or nothing prospect.
Exactly.
Here.
So they can't decide he killed Joseph Ryan and he didn't kill the other, or that he didn't kill one and, you know, vice versa.
So we know the jury got this case Friday. They deliberated for roughly 4 hours. They were back at it today. You've been talking with legal experts for quite some time. Did they say anything to you about the jury reaching a conclusion this early in the game, what that would sort of signify?
Right. So there's no direct correlation, right? It's all speculation. But the legal expert I spoke to said that usually when it takes this long, it's favoring in the defense. So we're going on about 8 or 9 hours at this point of deliberations, because you have to incorporate the fact that they did take lunch breaks. But usually when it goes this long, it is bringing into consideration that they are going through and they are checking every detail, making sure they check every box. They're taking their jobs very seriously, and they know what's at stake here, right? This is a man who does have a daughter still alive, and if he's innocent, that little girl will still have her father in her life. And of course, if he's not innocent, what happens to that little girl, right?
So let's talk about the case. The prosecution basically says Banfield planned this. He premeditated. There was premeditation with this, that there were 2 people who were killed, which is what accounts for that aggravated murder. Let's talk a bit more about the prosecution's case here.
Yeah, and so the prosecution has been clear. They believe Brendan Banfield came up with this elaborate scheme to kill his wife, Christine Banfield. And through that process, the process was to lure this other man named Joseph Ryan to their home and then pin it on this man and also kill him. So he is a victim here too as well. It does look like there might be something happening in the courtroom, or maybe that's just some audio from some of our video clips. But they say that he conspired with Juliana Perez-Magalis, and that is their family's au pair, a woman who he has also been having an affair with, right? This is a woman who, she was arrested as well. She took a plea deal, and as part of her plea deal,
all right, let's listen to the verdict right now.
All right, and juror number 9, you were the foreperson in this case, is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, and are these the verdicts of the jury?
Yes, it is.
And are they unanimous?
Yes, it is.
In criminal case number FE 2024-666, count 1, we, the jury on the issue, join in the case of the Commonwealth of Virginia versus Brendan Robert Banfield, defendant, find the defendant guilty of aggravated murder of Joseph Ryan and Christine Banfield as part of the same act or transaction. Case number FE 2024-666, count 4. We, the jury on the issue joined in the case of the Commonwealth of Virginia versus Brendan Robert Banfield defendant, find the defendant guilty of aggravated murder of Joseph Ryan within the same 3-year period during which he did also kill and murder Christine Banfield. In case number FE 2024-666, count 5, we the jury on the issue joined in the case of the Commonwealth of Virginia versus Brendan Robert Banfield defendant, find the defendant guilty of using a firearm in the commission of a felony. In case number FE 2024-873, count 1, we, the jury on the issue joined in the case of the Commonwealth of Virginia versus Brendan Robert Banfield defendant, find the defendant guilty of child endangerment.
All right, would either side like the jury polled?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
Members of the jury, if this is your verdict, please answer yes. If this is not your verdict, please answer no. Juror number 2? Juror number 5?
Yes.
Juror number 9?
Yes.
Juror number 10?
Yes.
Juror number 12?
Yes.
Juror number 19?
Yes.
Juror number 22?
Yes.
Juror number 25?
Yes.
Juror number 28?
Yes.
Juror number 32?
Yes.
Juror number 34?
Yes.
Juror number 37?
Yes.
Thank you.
The court does find that the jury verdict is unanimous at this time. Ladies and gentlemen, this completes your service in this case, and I know I speak for everybody that we thank you in this difficult case for all the time and attention you've taken to it. I do need to go back to the jury room for one more time, and I'll be back there in a few minutes just to talk to you before you leave, okay? All right, so you're excused to the jury room. Thank you.
And just like that, you saw the jury there made up of 7 women and 5 men, concluding that Brendan Banfield is guilty of murder of both killing his wife, Christine Banfield, and also Joseph Ryan, guilty of child endangerment, and also guilty of using a firearm in the commission of a felony. And I thought it was interesting there because he sort of had the same expression that we've seen throughout this trial,
Mr.
just sort of
Banfield, in
just
accordance
sullen,
with the jury
blank
verdict, I
look.
do find you guilty
Right, yeah.
of aggravated
And, I'm
murder
curious to
on
see if we're
count
going to see
1,
his face here in a
24,
moment, but, he
666,
hasn't really shown
and
much
also
emotion.
count
It did
4,
look for a moment, though, that he
24,
might
666,
get
and count
emotional,
5,
but then he
commission
didn't.
of a felony
We're
with
gonna
a
listen back
firearm
in.
of 2024-666. Also, on count 1 of 873 of child endangerment, I do find you guilty as found by the jury. Do you wish to have a pre-sentence investigation report, Mr. Carroll?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, I'll order a pre-sentence investigation report for this case. What date did you want to set this for?
I don't know what dates you would have available.
I could set it for, do you plan to have victim impact statements, I
Yes, ma'am,
assume,
yes.
and testimony? I mean, I could put it on, well, any day before July 1st.
Understood.
I'm retired then, so let's pick, is April far enough for you, Mr. Carroll?
Your Honor, may I just look at my schedule?
Sure.
Would there be a particular day?
April 17th is my sentencing day.
Okay.
Judge, that is the one day in April we would not.
Can't do, okay. Well, we can make it a different date in April. I mean, I do have March 20th, but that might be too quick.
Right, sounds like we've been hearing just a little housekeeping here. They're setting
Yeah.
a pre-sentencing date for Brendan Banfield for April 17th, but it sounded like that might not work for the prosecution, so they may be trying to determine here when he will appear back in court.
Right.
So we have some details about Brendan Banfield. We've been talking about what happens to Juliana Magales. What does she get as a result of this?
Well, so as part of her plea agreement, the terms of that plea agreement, she will get time served, but she still has to have a sentencing hearing, and that has not been scheduled yet. They were holding off on a sentencing hearing until after the trial, after she had testified.
Obviously, that lesser charge of manslaughter. We know
Right.
initially she was charged with murder.
murder.
And we should point out in this case, on the most serious charges, he could face life in prison, but we know they abolished the death penalty in Virginia back in
right.
2021, so that is off the table.
Correct.
So the most he could get
Is life.
life in prison. What do we know about the fate of Valerie, the daughter who was caught in the middle of all of this and who has lost now both her mother and father.
Right, so with the little girl, you know, she's 8.5 years old now. She was 4.5 when this happened. We're coming up on the anniversary of this. It happened at the end of February in 2023. So she's now 8.5 years old, and what does her future hold for her? You know, her mother is gone. Her father is now facing a possible life sentence. So our legal experts say there will now be hearings likely in family court to determine who gets custody for her. Will it be Brendan's family or will it be Christine's family?
Do we know who has been appearing in court to support, obviously, Christine Banfield and that side of the family? Is it her parents?
Yeah.
Are there other family members there as well?
So we definitely know that her father has been there. I believe her mother has been there as well. Her father was called to testify by the prosecution pretty early on. But, you know, they have both been there in the courtroom. The little girl, from what I understand, has not been in the courtroom in any capacity, which, you know, there's a lot of graphic stuff going on with this. And we know that Brendan Banfield's family, I believe his father and his stepmother have been consistently in the courtroom.
They must have been the ones sitting behind him.
Yes,
We saw them
I think that we
often.
saw them
Yeah.
just momentarily. And then as for his mother, I'm not sure if she has been in the courtroom throughout the entire thing. I know her name has been mentioned a lot, especially when it came to Juliana Perez-Margulies and when they were talking about who was paying her legal fees. We know Brendan's mother had been paying her legal fees up until when she took that plea agreement, and then that stopped. And then for Joseph Ryan, I can tell you his mother has been watching the trial virtually because she had some health issues. She wasn't able to come up here. She does plan to be here for sentencing. I just sent her a message to see if there's anything she'd like us to mention. And I know her sister has been in the courtroom watching the trial, and she's been watching it virtually.
Okay, yeah, so we're waiting. We should let folks at home know we are standing by for a press conference, presumably at this point from prosecutors and perhaps the defense attorney here,
Right.
the person who represented Banfield.
John
So-
Carroll.
Yeah, so take us back to the beginning. I know folks at home, they may not have been following every single detail of this case, but it was pretty graphic in terms of what we learned. We heard the prosecutor's side of the story for quite some time, from the very, very beginning, quite frankly. But this time we got to hear from Brendan Banfield himself, describing that relationship with the au pair, but also his wife.
Yeah.
And that was the only time we actually saw any real emotion from him. He seemed to have smiled as he talked about this relationship. And this really interesting dichotomy between his feelings that he said he had for Juliana versus the feelings he claimed he had for his wife of 19 years.
Right, and you know, he said that he would always return to his wife. He had multiple affairs.
And she did too. He said even though
He
she
said
can defend herself.
She did too, right.
Yeah.
And there's no evidence, there was no evidence presented from the prosecution or the defense to say that she had relationships with other people. They showed no evidence, and the prosecutor brought that up at the end. But you know, this was a moment where we did see some emotion from him, and I can tell you this is when he's listening to the body camera audio, the audio when police are inside the bedroom with him. And he's watching that video and reacting to that right there. So that was probably the most emotion in terms of crying that we saw from him. But when he was up there on the stand testifying, I mean, when he was talking about the affairs, when he was talking about how him and Juliana's relationship first started, he was almost smirking. So a very weird reaction. One that really bothered a lot of people when we were looking at the comments on YouTube and on the text we were getting. People were very confused about his facial expressions during all of this.
And we know the au pair, Juliana Perez-Margulies, will be sentenced on February 13th. We're just getting that news. So that's in, 11 days from now?
Yeah,
Wow.
that's
And we know that she was
coming up
cooperating.
quickly.
She was a key witness for prosecutors in this case.
She was, but it's important to mention Brendan Banfield was arrested prior to Juliana Perez-Margulies taking that plea agreement. So for a timeline for you guys, in February of 2023, that's when Christine Banfield and Joseph Ryan were killed. In October of 2023, that is when Juliana Perez-Margulies was first arrested. It wouldn't be until September of the following year, so 2024, that's when Brendan Banfield was arrested. And the prosecutors said he was arrested because of their evidence that they found. Juliana didn't take that plea agreement until a month later in October of 2024. So while she's their star witness, if you will, they said they had a case with or without her. She was just the bonus.
Do we know what? Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, you know, the thing that really caught so many people as they were listening to the details here is Christine is dead. They have moved themselves into their bedroom, right? Put pictures in the room, set up as if they're a couple.
And they were a couple.
After this vicious murder.
Right.
The murders of two people.
Yeah, and so Brendan was asked about that when he took the stand, and his response to that was, well, she saved my life. Juliana saved my life. She was a hero. how could you not fall in love with somebody that saved your life? That was his response to that. But so for the timeline there, the killings happened in February. As soon as they were able to move back into the home, Juliana, Brendan Banfield, and the little girl, again, she's 4.5 at the time, moved back into the home. And Juliana testified that a few months later, she moved into the master bedroom. And that's where we saw those photos inside the bedroom, her lingerie in the closet, her photo and framed photos of them clearly out on dates. And then there were the love letters that we heard about at length. Love letters where, at points things were not going well for her and Brendan. She was questioning the relationship.
And many of these letters came after Christine was already gone. So these were his profession of love for her after these murders happened.
Right, yeah. So all of those letters were from when she was in jail. She was writing back and forth with Brendan, and those letters continued till around when he was arrested in September.
And we know she was working out some sort of deal, right, with Netflix or the family?
Yeah.
And journalists, apparently just came out that she had been talking to journalists as well.
Right, so she said that she started to really take the messages she was receiving from producers, I don't know if you would call them journalists, because they were offering her money, right? They were offering her money to tell her story to only them. And she said that they were her friends, we heard her say at one point, these producers, and they were offering her money, but she didn't think it was enough money to tell her story. So a lot of weird things happening there.
In addition to just the fact that these deaths, these horrific deaths happened, another sort of centerpiece of this is this fetish website and this fetish lifestyle. You talked to Joseph Ryan's mom about his choices, his lifestyle. A lot of people may not know much about this fetish website, but that also is one of the distinguishing things about this particular case that I think perhaps drew a lot of attention to a case that maybe people wouldn't have had on their radar.
I think just the audacity that someone would try, and keep this in mind, Christine Banfield, at one point, she was a nurse who treated sexual assault patients. And so Brendan is accused of setting his wife up for this sexual fantasy role play scenario. They use the language rape fantasy. So you're setting up your wife, who is a prior sexual assault nurse, for that. And it's just raising a lot of questions. When she was killed, she was a nurse at a pediatric hospital. So I think there's that level of, why would you do that? Like, how much, what's going on here?
And that is part of this elaborate plot that we heard so much about. This they didn't wake up one morning and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. Based on what we heard during this trial, Juliana and Brendan, they've been going back and forth for quite a while to figure out how to carry this out, including the visits to the gun range.
Right, so their relationship, it started in August of 2022, I believe. So Juliana joined the family in 2021. In 2022, in August of 2022, Juliana says that relationship began with Brendan Banfield. She, when she was testifying, did not explain how the relationship started. We only found out how it may or may not have started through Brendan Banfield's testimony, where he said that Juliana initiated it. She was pressuring him. She was making comments about how she had dated or was trying to date people with similar names, similar appearance. So,
which he loved, apparently, when he was recounting that sort of dynamic.
But what's interesting here is that the power dynamic between the two of them was not something that either side really got into. She's an au pair, right? You come to live with someone, right? Your boss has much more power than you have. And so I wonder if that also, in addition to all of these details that the jurors heard, they said, wait a minute, the power really was in the hands of Brendan Banfield in this relationship, not Juliana Magalhaes. Now, she owns her actions, but in terms of the dynamic of who controlled what, he really was in control.
And I think that goes back to the conversation of the fact that Brendan's mother was paying for her legal fees. So while she didn't speak and talk about the story she presented on the stand when she testified, she was being represented by Brendan's family. She is from Brazil. She does not have family here. So her family is the Banfield family. And so she's kind of stuck there and relying on them. She mentioned how she was relying on Teresa, Brendan Banfield's mother, to pay her commissary, to connect her with her family, to pay for those phone calls. So there's a lot of heavy reliance on the Banfield family. And it wasn't until she took that plea deal that the money cut off and she then turned to the journalists. But if you want to go back to that plan, They start their relationship in August of 2022. In October is when she says Brendan came to her with this plan, this elaborate plan to get rid of his wife because he said divorce wasn't an option. Right. He didn't want to have to worry about custody of their little girl, and he didn't want to have to worry about the money. And who knows what that means, but he said divorce was.
Which a lot of people question. They're like, wait, what? You think this is the better option than just simply getting a divorce?
Right, and that's according to her testimony, right? And I think it's important to keep in mind what the prosecutor said at the end. You may not believe Juliana, you may not believe Brendan Banfield. It's going to come down to who do you believe more in this case.
And we know that all Brendan said in response to these questions about whether or not he murdered his wife was, that's just absolutely crazy.
Right.
That's it.
Those were his words. It is interesting that as they made this case about aggravated murder, which suggests that you are involved, you have planned in some way, you have researched it. The thing that stood out to me is he knew that his wife had a blood clotting disorder. So if you have a blood clotting disorder and you are being stabbed multiple times, it is very difficult for you to eclipse that, right? Because you already have a blood clotting disorder. He knew this.
And he also knew that she was a prior sexual assault nurse, right? Like he knew a lot of things. They were together for, I believe, almost 20 years. They had been together through so much. They had a child together. They lived in New York. They moved down here for his job, and she came with him and then was able to find a job. That came up during his testimony that she had done a lot for him, and we didn't get to hear a lot about her during this trial, but we do know a little bit about her and what we know and what happened. I mean, it's absolutely horrifying.
Was that by design, though? Did they want to take her out of this a little bit to put more of the emphasis on who Brendan was and who,
maybe,
Juliana was?
Right. And they didn't really touch character here. And one of our legal experts, I asked him about that, and he was saying you don't need to go after the character of Christine or defend that. Now, they could have, when they brought up the conversation of how she was having affairs, that was an opportunity where the prosecution could have come up and presented a witness who could have said otherwise, or the defense could have provided a witness that said she was having affairs, but no evidence was provided to indicate that she was. And again, she is not on trial here. At the end of the day, she's not the one on trial. Joseph Ryan is not on trial. It is Brendan Banfield on trial here.
Brendan Banfield on trial, and Brendan Banfield found guilty of 4 counts today. Guilty on aggravated murder of Christine Banfield, of Joseph Ryan, guilty of using a firearm in commission of a felony, and child endangerment.
Again, we are standing by for a press conference from prosecutors and the defense attorney. We will bring that to you live when it happens. Stay right here.